We cannot forget the ghastly A-bomb dropped over Hiroshima in 1945 as merely a passing horror. Neither can we set aside as something to be forgotten and considered only as a means of protection in event of warfare the nuclear test made thereafter. All, however great or however small, will reverberate somewhere in our world. We've scattered seed and shall reap the harvest. When a thermonuclear test is made, there may not be an immediate manifestation as a result, but it sets up a current of energy in the ether of space within the strata of our atmosphere, which returns again to us in a like condition, though more concentrated. Consider the so-called sonic blasts we are told are caused by jet planes or supersonic fighter planes breaking the sound barrier. Often there is no plane in the area at the time of the concussion. On such occasions, what then is the answer? Echoes of A and H bomb detonations. A and H bombs. So we shall well experience more severe effects as we continue to release deadly chemical elements into our atmosphere. It is even possible that our planet itself may be affected to the extent that it will be rent apart. In the June 25, 1956 issue of the Newsweek magazine, it is stated that on one great point or issue, fallout radiation, opinions have always been sharply divided. This article admits in part the serious effects of radiation, however denying any evidence that it affects weather or climate. To quote in part, last week in Washington, the National Academy of Science published the first explicit and definite fallout report. The Academy has spent a year evaluating the results of countless animal experiments and reports on human victims, including the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Marshall Islanders, and Japanese fishermen. Its consensus confirmed what some scientists have long warned: even the lowest levels of radiation can have serious effects. The Academy supported the AEC's claim that nuclear tests do not raise the Earth's level of rays to a dangerous degree, but it verified that any atomic war would instantly change the global radiation picture for the worse, leaving mankind more susceptible to leukemia, cancers, eye cataracts, sterility, and shortening of life. Yet in the May 14th number of Newsweek, an article appeared which reeks of mean pride in destruction at the expense of the nation. To quote in part, the U.S. at last is capable of dropping an H-bomb, the equivalent of 10 million tons of TNT, from an airplane at 50,000 feet. To prove it, the U.S. is conducting Operations Red Wing, a series of thermonuclear tests off Iwataki Atoll in the Pacific. This is followed by a statement that is in contradiction to the June 25th article, quote, "The radioactive fallout is of little danger to the world or even to those within the vicinity of the explosion. As it contributes to the radioactive background against which we all live, it is even less important." To quote the article of June the 25th, the most startling revelation was not about present dangers, but the perils of mutations in future generations. It would seem contradiction is an excellent instrument to keep the mass of people confused as to what is true or false, and drifting in a rudderless boat in a sea of befuddled thoughts. To continue quote of May 14th magazine to exemplify costly expenditures involved. The first explosion was part of a vast atom and hydrogen bomb test, which will cost more than $150 million, attention Mr. Taxpayer, exclusive of service equipment and nuclear material, and requires 13,500 men, 118 aircraft, 31 boats, and 22 ships. Our current attempt to acquire greater power through the atom and our handling of the problem of spaceflight is maladjusted as well as a waste of our resources. Energies intended for man's welfare. The forces our leaders and proponents of nuclear fission have employed to create destruction are the same forces that can be used to create constructively. It would be far wiser to take time to marshal these powers constructively rather than destructively, and to make more effort to achieve and finance a worldwide peace movement, which is far more urgent and vitally essential if man expects to survive on this old earth. We should never forget that nature has plenty of worlds to experiment with. Man only has one. Chapter 7. Peace. Erratic man plunges blindly and alarmingly onward while the guardians of space stand by, assisting in many ways unknown to us, desiring always to give a helping hand to turn man aside from the yawning abyss his stumbling feet approach, desiring to steer him aright without taking the bull by the horns. It is not their wish to use force or exhibit their powers unless absolutely necessary, but to serve their brother, to help him to bring peace and harmony to his world, for their motives are universal in scope, not selfish. Our brothers, the guardians, wisely remind us of the following words, which are so little heeded on earth. When evil speaks of good, be very careful how you accept it. Do not sit down with the devil to plan any good deeds, or it will always be of benefit to him. Is there any viler hypocrisy than enemies of society pretending and preaching peace to those they would make their victims? Much more propaganda has been quoted in late years and many more conferences held than the number of times these two classics for directness uttered by Dr. Wisely Swift have been quoted. Don't enter into any system to make the world good when you have to sit down with the devil to plan it. Also, beware when the devil teaches brotherhood. Facing unhappy facts might be revolting to great numbers of people, but better to face them than to be overpowered by them, to both the shame and chagrin of the many. Hypocrisy has so devoutly mingled with religion that it is frequently mistaken for both religion and truth. Hypocrisy loves disguise. Deceit ever masquerades as truth, and propaganda is ever served up pleasantly to accommodate the thoughtless, and prejudice ever tries to tip the scales, while all three are easily peddled to the naive and indiscriminate, without serving the scales of justice one particle. In Matthew 23:28, even so ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. And today, at the diplomatic conference, half of the world's distress is born of hypocritical conference forsworn. We of America deceived ourselves when we allowed the gouged taxpayer to be exploited on a world basis as a substitute for American statesmanship. It is God's will that any nation or group of nations on earth shall put God's people in colossal debt. Or is it the will of spurious leaders that have been denied and defiled the will of God? In this country, the hatching of humanitarianism that is not also good Americanism is a hoax and a fraud. Chapter 8. Conquest of the Skies. Man has reached the point where if a thing is simple, he completely overlooks it. If it is not complex, it is of no value in his estimation and cannot be a success. We could develop methods of flight much simpler and more effective if we would toss aside the sheer brute force of jet and rocket propulsion, of fighting against laws of gravitational pull, for a natural force existing in the very air we breathe and everywhere present in the universe. Electromagnetic force. Conversion would be much simpler if scientists would apply themselves and broaden their comprehension of natural principle, and far less expensive. At least man has not so far figured out a way to charge for the air he breathes. Science knows that actual magnetic currents flow through everything.